At the central hearing hall of the Galactic Council on Varix Prime, Elias Vorn walked beneath a ceiling of white stone and suspended light. He was Earth's senior treaty envoy, 61 years old, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and known for ending wars before fleets had to finish them. He had come to keep Earth from being marked as the power that shattered a ceasefire. If the Council condemned him in public, Earth would lose standing, treaty leverage, and the right to shape the peace that came after. The floor curved in wide rings around the central platform, each ring packed with delegations waiting to watch a man be broken on record. Across from him sat the prosecuting bloc from the Keeler Union, the alliance that had spent the last week telling the public that Earth had turned a fragile truce into a near-system war. Behind Elias, the Earth delegation occupied a narrow tier. His junior counsel, Mara Chun, met his eyes once and gave a small nod. She did not need to explain what the room already made obvious. Half the chamber had arrived, expecting a verdict before the hearing even began. At the highest tier, beneath the council seal, sat presiding arbiter Varon. Varon belonged to the Orinal, a tall, silver-skinned species with long neck lines and 4 narrow fingers on each hand. His face was almost human in structure, but the eyes were too large and the irises too pale, like ice lit from behind. He brought down the sounding rod once, and the murmur in the hall died with practiced speed. "This hearing concerns the conduct of Elias Vorn of Earth," Varon said, his voice carried by the hall's field projectors, during the collapse of the Helios Armistice corridor at Belizer Gate. The words were formal. The meaning was not. Everyone here knew the headline that had already spread across the public networks. Human envoy triggers armed breach. 3 worlds nearly fall into open war. Elias stood straight, hands loose at his sides. He had learned long ago that people trusted a body before they trusted a sentence. If he looked defensive, they would hear fear in every word. If he looked angry, they would call it proof. So he gave him neither. The chief prosecutor rose from the Keeler tier. Advocate Turansal was lean even by his species standards, with dark green skin, a crest of horn plates along the back of his skull, and a voice that always sounded as if it had already won. "The council will hear," Saul began, "that Elias Vorn violated the chain of restraint at Belizer Gate, issued coercive threats during sealed negotiation, and authorized fleet movement under civilian cover." He paused and let the language settle over the chamber before he continued. "The council will also hear that this conduct placed 3 inhabited systems on the edge of open conflict and damaged trust across all current humanitarian corridors. There was not only guilt, contamination. If they tied him to the collapse of trust itself, they could use his hearing to restructure treaty law for the whole sector." A screen of light opened above the central floor. It showed a clean visual summary prepared for public transmission. On one side was a map of Belizer Gate and the disputed lanes around it. On the other was a Elias file image, stern and still. Beneath both ran a bar of simplified charges that any listener from any world could understand. Threat, escalation, unauthorized movement, ceasefire breach. The public wording had been selected for effect. Saul turned slightly, not toward Elias, but toward the watching tiers. This case is not only about one man. It is about whether Earth believes itself bound by law when law becomes inconvenient. A low ripple moved through the foreign delegations. Several cameras pivoted toward Elias. He kept his eyes on the prosecutor, not on the cameras, not on the tiers, not on the line where Earth's delegation sat with too little room and too much silence. Saul called the first witness package. The hall display shifted to clipped excerpts from the failed negotiation day. None lasted more than 7 seconds. A soundbite of raised voices, a visual of ships moving, a final frame of signal bloom and disruption near the corridor mouth. Every excerpt ended just before context would have mattered. Mara's jaw tightened. The package had not been built for truth. It had been built for audience memory. When the clips ended, Saul looked down at Elias, as if granting him the dignity of being noticed. "Envoy Vorn, before witness testimony begins, do you deny that you authorized Earth escort vessels to move across the corridor line during active negotiations?" "I deny your framing," Elias said. He did not raise his voice. He did not play to the room. He let the answer land cleanly. Saul smiled without warmth. Then perhaps you admit the movement and merely dispute its character. I will answer the event, Elias said, after the council confirms whether the record shown here is complete. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. Saul's smile thinned. The council has been provided the certified broadcast record. That was not my question. Vorn lifted one hand. Envoy Vorn, you will have a chance to respond in full. Elias inclined his head. Then I asked the council to note, before the public and before the tribunal, that the prosecution has introduced a broadcast compilation rather than the full primary record. The chamber hesitated. It was a small shift, but it was there. Saul moved at once. The compilation is standard for opening presentation and has undergone technical normalization only. Normalization by whom? Elias asked. Saul did not answer him directly. You may raise procedural questions in their proper window. Elias let the silence stretch one beat longer than comfort allowed. The council should also note that what is being judged today may depend less on what happened at Belizer Gate than on who controlled what the public was allowed to see of it. That line did what he needed, not because it proved anything. It did not, but because it shifted the hearing 1 inch away from the road Saul had prepared. Vorn's gaze hardened. The council has noted the objection. Good, Elias thought. Not accepted. Not denied. Noted. That was enough for the first minute. The prosecutor called the live witness. Witness Nerol Dox entered through the side aperture with the careful pace of someone trained for solemn rooms. He was Vethri, one of the tall, reed-framed species from the border systems, with blue-gray skin stretched over long bones and a mouth set lower than a human mouth would be. He wore the badge of signal oversight. That was the point. The witness had been selected for technical credibility. Saul led him through an efficient sequence. Name. Assignment. Presence near Belizer relay net. Access to intercepted negotiation spill. All clean. All rehearsed. State what you heard, Saul said. Dox folded his long hands. I heard Envoy Vorn say that if the corridor was not opened on Earth's terms, vessels would move regardless of sanction. A murmur traveled up the seats. Saul, let it ride, then asked, was the tone coercive? Yes. Did it indicate willingness to use force? It indicated willingness to override council authority. There was the real charge again. Not only danger, defiance. Saul stepped back, satisfied. No further questions. Vorn turned. Envoy Vorn, you may examine. Elias walked 3 measured paces closer to the witness stand. He did not move quickly. Quick movement in rooms like this was always converted into aggression by someone who needed it. Supervisor Dox, he said, what was your station at the time of the spill you described? Relay 7. External acoustic confirmation. Inside the negotiation room? No. Inside the chamber support ring? No. Then your source was an external capture line. Yes. Direct line. A secondary line. How many relays between that line and the chamber source? Dox paused, almost too briefly to notice. 3. 3 active relays or 3 listed relays? 3 active. Under battle masking? A second pause. Longer this time. Yes. Elias nodded once, as if confirming a number in a ledger. So the statement you attribute to me came through a secondary line across 3 active relays during battle masking at a moment when corridor traffic was under suppression. Yes. Did you hear the sentence before it? Dox's eyes shifted. Not in full. The sentence after it? Not in full. Did you hear the demand made to my delegation immediately before the phrase you quoted? No. Did you hear whether the line had already dropped twice before the part you say you heard? I cannot confirm that. But you are confirming tone. Dox drew himself taller. The meaning was clear. The meaning to you, Elias said. Not the sequence. Saul rose. The witness has already established reliability within technical norms. Elias did not look at him. Technical norms for damage capture are not the same as contextual completeness. Vorn let the exchange stand. Elias returned to the witness. Supervisor Dox, one final question. At the time you heard this phrase, were Earth escort vessels already moving? Docs hesitated. Saul objected. The witness is signal oversight, not tactical control. Yet the prosecution used his hearing to support escalation sequence, Elias said. If sequence does not matter now, it did not matter then. Vorn considered, then nodded once. The witness will answer if able. Docs with the lower edge of his mouth. I cannot confirm vessel movement timing from that. Station. Elias let that answer breathe in the hall. Then he said, very calmly, thank you. No further questions. He stepped back. Mara did not move, but he could feel her attention sharpen. They had not won anything, but the first witness had not held. The room understood that much. What had sounded simple a moment earlier no longer sounded complete. Saul rose again, visibly irritated that the ground had shifted under a simple opening. The prosecution reminds the chamber that incomplete acoustic context does not erase the fact of threatening language. Elias answered before the arbiter could. Nor does threatening language exist in a vacuum if the line before it has been removed. Vorn brought down the sounding rod once. Enough. The chamber will proceed. As Docs was dismissed, the public stream icon continued to glow over the chamber. Millions were still watching. Elias returned to his mark. He could feel the old physical pressure that came before long fights. He had spent 30 years in rooms where people assembled knives out of rules. This hearing might become his most visible. Mara leaned toward him while the chamber recalibrated exhibits. You pulled doubt into the room, she whispered. No, Elias said. Not enough. He watched Saul speaking quietly with two technical aides from the council archive tier. One of them looked up at Elias, then away too quickly. That confirmed what instinct had already told him. This was not a tribunal that had discovered the easiest reading. This was a tribunal that had been handed one. Vorn announced a recess of 6 minutes for archive coordination. The chamber eased without softening. Delegates stood. Some spoke in low bursts. Some kept their eyes openly on Elias, as though studying an animal that had failed to die on cue. A shadow fell across his station. Elias looked up to see Counselor Thesmar, one of the neutral bloc members from the Archenreach. Mars people were unmistakably alien even at a distance. He stood almost a head taller than Elias, with charcoal skin patterned by pale mineral lines, no external ears, and a pair of deep amber eyes set wide on a broad face. His mouth split vertically rather than horizontally, and when he spoke, the translators softened the layered resonance of his species' throat tones. You are not contesting the event, Mars said quietly. You are contesting the curation. I am contesting anything false enough to become law. Mars' gaze shifted toward the prosecution tier. You assume law is what they came to build. No, Elias said. I assume they came to use law to justify what they had already built. Mars studied him for another second. Then you had better force them to show their tools. The counselor moved away before Mara could say anything. The sounding rod struck again. Recess ended. Vorn straightened in his chair. The hearing resumes. Saul did not begin with another witness. Instead, he advanced toward the center with a new confidence that looked almost forced. The prosecution acknowledges the defense concern regarding completeness and will address it directly. The record shown in opening compilation underwent routine broadcast normalization by the Council Media Verification Office. No substantive content was altered. He said it too quickly. Elias waited. Saul continued. The chamber should not be distracted by administrative detail when the core actions remain undisputed. There, Elias said, before anyone else could speak. That is the point of divergence. You call chain of custody administrative detail. I call it the difference between evidence and theater. A small stir ran through the neutral tiers. Vorn looked down from the bench. Envoy Vorn, state your request clearly. I request the Council identify the officers who handled the source record, the process used on the public version, and the grounds on which the primary record has not yet been shown in full. Saul answered before Vorn could. Denied by relevance. The public version is not under dispute in substance. Elias turned, finally, toward the watching chamber. Then the prosecution should have no objection to the source. The line landed harder than he expected. Several delegates exchanged open looks. One of the archive aides near Saul went pale at the throat. Varen's fingers rested on the sounding rod. The council will hear technical foundation. That changed the shape of the hearing. It was no longer only about what Elias had said at Belizer Gate. It was about who had shaped the record before the chamber ever heard it. It meant the wall had cracked enough that procedure now had to pretend it was still procedure. Saul's expression did not change, but the muscles in his jaw shifted once. Very well. The prosecution calls Archive Supervisor Len, or good, Elias thought. Bring in the keepers. When Len, or took the stand, the chamber grew quieter than it had for witness testimony. Archive supervisors rarely appeared in open hearing unless someone had made a serious procedural demand, and almost every delegation understood what chain of custody meant. If the record had been shaped, the case had been shaped with it. Or was Serene, a species from the inner stations whose bodies looked almost transparent at the edges under bright light. He had no hair, no visible nose ridge, and a network of faint silver vessels visible beneath pale amber skin. His clothing hung close to his narrow frame, and he carried himself with the stiff economy of a man who preferred sealed rooms to public ones. Saul handled the foundation first. He led, or through title, clearance, office authority, and standard operating procedure for any record distributed to multi-species public channels. The terms sounded harmless in sequence. Signal balancing, translator synchronization, noise suppression, harmonic smoothing for species with different auditory thresholds. All true, all ordinary, all easy to use as cover. Did your office alter the substantive meaning of the Belizer Gate record? Saul asked. No, or said. Did your office fabricate any line, image, or event? No. Was the public record prepared according to routine broadcast safety protocol? Yes. Saul turned half toward the chamber. There's your answer. Elias rose before the statement could settle. Not yet. Varen nodded. Proceed. Elias approached with his hands behind his back. Supervisor, or you used the phrase substantive meaning. Define it. Or blinked once. Material alteration to factual event content. Who decides materiality? My office, under Council Broadcast Code. Your office alone? Under supervisory review. Named supervisors? Or hesitated? Myself. Senior Review Officer Fail. Media Liaison Office Concurrence. Media Liaison under which branch? Public Communications. Reporting to, or shifted, the Executive Coordination Bureau. That produced a murmur from the upper diplomatic ring. The Executive Coordination Bureau sat too close to political management for anyone to call it neutral. Elias nodded as if the answer merely confirmed a line he already knew. So the public version of the Belizer Gate record passed not only through technical broadcast handling, but through communications concurrence linked to executive coordination. It is normal when a security incident may affect intersystem stability. Normal, Elias repeated. Not neutral. Saul objected. Argument. Sustained, Varen said, though not with much force. Elias continued. Supervisor, or did your office remove pauses? From the record. Insignificant dead air. Did you remove translator lag? Yes. Did you remove false starts? Yes. Cross-channel overlap? Yes. Did you cut any section for runtime? Or what took too long to answer? Some sections were condensed. Condensed, Elias said. Please explain. Repetitive material was compressed to preserve listener clarity. Who labeled it repetitive? My office. Was any of that material spoken by me? Yes. Was any spoken by the Keeler security delegate opposite me? Yes. Was any spoken by the corridor civilian marshal? Another pause. Yes. Elias turned slightly toward the chamber. So the public has not seen the full order of demands, responses, interruptions, or civilian warnings. Saul stepped in sharply. The public has seen the event in all relevant respects. Elias looked at, or not Saul. Did your office cut the moment when civilian Marshall Island requested reopening of the South Relief Lane? Or his throat moved? Yes. Did you cut the line in which Keeler Command refused that request pending tactical review? Or did not answer? Varen's voice came down from the bench. The witness will answer. Yes, or said. The chamber changed tone. No outcrow. Just a tightening. Several delegates leaned forward. Elias pressed once more. Did you cut the gap between that refusal and the phrase I am accused of using? Yes. How long was the gap? 43 seconds. The number hit harder than any emotional statement would have. 43 seconds was not smoothing. It was sequence. Saul moved fast, almost visibly alarmed now. 43 seconds of fragmented interruption under layered signal corruption. The defense is inflating a chaotic interval into conspiracy. Elias finally turned toward him. Not conspiracy. Causality. Vorn brought the rod down. The chamber will maintain order. Elias stepped back and let Saul attempt to recover the witness. That too was part of the work. Once exposed, a bad foundation often collapses harder if left alone for a moment. Saul asked a string of rescue questions. Did the omitted lines change the fact of rising tensions? No. Did they erase the later movement of Earth vessels? No. Did they prove malicious handling by the archive office? No. Were answered carefully and survived each one. But the shape had changed. The public version was no longer clean in anyone's mind. From that point on, every new claim would have to survive a simpler question. What else had been cut, delayed, or reframed? Before the chamber saw it, when her stepped down, Mara leaned toward Elias again. You have the gate open, she murmured. For what? For source access. If they can still avoid it, Elias said, they will. Saul made the same calculation. Instead of fighting the technical point further, he shifted the hearing back to action. He wanted the room to stop thinking about edited records and start thinking about moving ships. The prosecution calls Commander Jor Malek of Keeler Border Command. Malek was not built like any species in the chamber. Keeler officers were squat and heavily muscled, with deep red skin, thick neck plates, and 4 eyes arranged in 2 horizontal pairs. To human listeners, their voices always carried the blunt force of a threat, even when translated politely. Malek's uniform was immaculate. So was his contempt. He testified with military certainty. Yes, the corridor was tense. Yes, all parties were warned that unsanctioned movement could trigger defensive reaction. Yes, Earth escort vessels crossed the line. Yes, the sequence coincided with weapons activation near the lane mouth. He did not lie outright. Men like him rarely needed to. They arranged truth the way an engineer arranged steel. Saul walked him through the timeline displayed above the floor. Each mark made Earth's action appear earlier, cleaner, and more intentional. When cross-examination began, Elias did not challenge the map first. He challenged the reason for the movement. Commander Malek, he said, what was Earth's declared purpose for remaining inside the corridor chamber after our armistice talk stalled? Malek's upper left eyes narrowed. To continue negotiation. And outside the chamber? To maintain escort posture. For whom? For vessels under Earth registry. Elias shook his head once. Not sufficient. For whom? Malek's jaw flexed. For mixed civilian traffic under temporary shelter. Correct. Mixed civilian traffic. Elias paced 1 step. How many non-Earth civilian hulls were in the South Relief Lane at the time you ordered tactical review? Malek did not answer at once. I do not recall the exact number. You signed a tactical hold. Yes. And you do not recall how many civilian hulls were left waiting under live threat. I recall enough to make command decisions. Then recall this. Were there children aboard the Yara convoy? Saul objected at once. Inflammatory. Elias did not lower his gaze. The prosecution has turned human movement into abstract aggression. I am restoring the reason for the movement. Vorn considered, then said, the witness will answer. Malek's lower right eye twitched. Yes. There were dependent passengers. Medical transports? Yes. Non che la registri. Yes. Then when you delayed reopening the lane, you were not pausing a tactical contest between armed blocks. You were holding trapped civilians from multiple worlds in a corridor already under crosslock risk. Malek's mouth hardened. We were preventing exploitation of civilian cover. By whom? Any actor. Name one confirmed actor using those civilians as cover. Malek remained silent. Elias took one step closer. Commander, did Earth request lane reopening before Earth escort vessels moved? Yes. Did you deny it? I delayed it. For review. Yes. How long? Under 10 minutes. 8 minutes and 12 seconds, Elias said. In a live corridor. Malek's 4 eyes fixed on him. Your tone suggests the command burden was mine alone. My tone suggests the burden became yours when you took authority and left civilians under risk. Saul objected again. Argument. Withdrawn, Elias said, though he did not sound withdrawn. One final question. When Earth escort vessels moved, were they advancing on Keeler military positions? They crossed a control line. That was not my question. Malek's silence stretched. Were they advancing on your military positions, Elias repeated, or moving toward the trapped civilian stream? Malek answered through locked teeth. Toward the stream. The chamber held the answer like a lit wire. Elias nodded. No further questions. For the first time that day, the neutral block did not look bored. Saul tried to recover on redirect, but the witness had already served his real function. He had given the chamber a different picture. Earth had moved, yes, but Earth had moved toward civilians after a denied request to open the lane. That was not innocence. Not yet, but it was no longer villainy by default. The core question had shifted again. The chamber was no longer asking only whether Earth moved. It was asking why Earth moved and what had been happening in the lane before that movement began. After the witness was dismissed, Vorn announced the chamber would hear motion on source access. Saul argued first, wrapping urgency in caution. The full raw record, he claimed, contained damaged channels, private diplomatic material, tactical codes, and live civilian identifiers. Opening it in public could destabilize still fragile border sectors. Elias answered without raising his voice. Then redact, identifiers, not sequence. Silence. Codes, not causality. You cannot claim law while withholding the order in which the law was broken. Several delegates signaled dissent. Saul saw it too. He changed his ground. The defense wants spectacle. No, Elias said. The prosecution already had its spectacle. I want the source. The line struck harder than the last. Even Vorn's face changed, not emotionally, but in the tiny tightening around the eyes that meant the arbiter knew a phrase would carry beyond this room. Vorn withdrew with 2 associate arbiters for 4 minutes. No one in the hall pretended to relax. Mara took the chance to slide a small pad toward Elias with preliminary archive notations pulled from council disclosure rules. One line was circled twice. Executive concurrence invoked under Public Stability Clause. He looked at her. She whispered, that clause is used when an outcome is already being managed. That was the clearest warning yet. The issue was no longer a rough public summary. It was whether the hearing had been steered before it opened. When Vorn returned, the chamber rose and sat again. The tribunal orders limited source review, he said. Primary sequence shall be opened in segments. Civilian identifiers masked. Tactical code string suppressed. Disputed intervals preserved. Saul's face became still in the way of men trying not to show damage. Vorn continued. The chamber will first review the negotiation interval preceding the quoted threat line. The hall lights dimmed. Above them, the display widened, no longer polished for public audience, but raw enough that audio levels shifted between voices and the translator field had to work harder to keep pace. The image was from inside the Belizer chamber at the gate station. Elias saw himself there, 2 weeks younger, more tired, jacket open at the throat, one hand braced on a table, while signal loss flickered across the wall display. Opposite him sat Delegate RHYSS Tau of the Keeler Block and civilian Marshall Island between them, trying to hold a lane open that was already dying. The raw sequence played. Island asking for immediate south lane release. Tau saying tactical review was not complete. Elias saying review was taking too long. Signal breakup. Another request from Island, more urgent. Tau refusing again. Translatalak. Elias leaning in, jaw tight, saying, if you keep the lane shut, I will move ships to keep those people alive. Not what the public had been shown. Not on Earth's terms. Not naked threat. A warning tethered to a denied relief request. The chamber listened all the way through. No one moved. Even Saul knew better than to interrupt a screen that was now doing his damage for him. When the clip ended, Elias did not immediately speak. He let the silence do its work. It was a rule he had learned in much smaller rooms. When truth finally entered, do not crowd it. Vorn broke the stillness. The source differs materially in sequence from the public compilation. Saul rose in controlled anger. The source still shows envoy Vorn threatening unilateral movement in a live corridor. Yes, Elias said, after repeated refusal to reopen a civilian lane. That does not legalize armed motion. It does clarify motive, Elias said. The arbiter looked down at both of them. This hearing will continue. It was the closest thing to a warning he could give without choosing a side. Elias knew it. He also knew something else now. The first hidden layer had been forced into daylight. The case against him no longer rested on what he had supposedly said. It now rested on whether the chamber would accept that the missing before mattered less than the visible after. That was why the next witnesses would be harder. Because once simple blame began to break, power never surrendered. It reorganized. He lifted his eyes toward the archive tier. 2 seats were empty now. The aides who had stood behind Saul were gone. Running messages, Elias thought. Calling handlers. Trying to decide what must be defended next. Good. Let them work under pressure for once. The hearing had stopped being a fast burial. It was becoming something far more dangerous to the people who had arranged it. It was becoming a record. The second source review did not begin immediately. That delay mattered because it exposed how much of the hearing was no longer running on confidence. Saul asked for procedural consultation. 2 members of the Keeler block requested private review of archive integrity. One of the associate arbiters conferred twice with the technical bench. Every pause told the chamber the same thing. The source record had not behaved the way the prosecution expected it to behave in public. Vorn denied a closed review. The matter concerns evidence already used in open accusation, he said. The remedy, where possible, remains public. That sentence shifted the room again. The tribunal was not on Elias' side, but it no longer belonged entirely to his enemies either. The next witness was called by the prosecution with visible reluctance. Civilian Marshall Island appeared from remote link. The image projected above a narrow stand rather than bringing her physically into the chamber. She was Avon, a bird-bone species from the transit worlds, with dark gold skin, a thin face, and 2 narrow feathered ridges sweeping back from each temple. Her eyes were black and bright, and exhaustion had settled around them like bruising. Saul tried to keep her testimony narrow. He asked about her role. She confirmed she had been the corridor's civilian marshal responsible for lane separation and relief movement. He asked whether the Belizer situation had been deteriorating before Earth moved ships. She said yes. He asked whether envoy Vorn had threatened unilateral escort intervention. She said yes. He stopped there. Too quickly. Elias rose. Marshall Island, when you requested the South Lane be reopened, why did you request it? To move trapped civilian traffic out of intersecting fire risk. How many hulls were in that stream at the moment of your first request? 41 registered. Possibly more in signal shadow. Was Earth the majority registry? No. Was Keeler the majority registry? No. So the lane did not concern one side's advantage. It concerned a mixed civilian stream. Yes. Elias nodded. Did you believe delay increased risk? Yes. Did you say that inside the chamber? I said it 3 times. Did the public compilation include any of those warnings? Island glanced toward the arbiter bench, then back toward Elias through the projector field. No. A hum passed through the outer tiers. Not anger. Recognition. The kind that spreads when listeners start stitching together the parts they were denied. Did I request lane reopening before threatening ship movement? Yes. How many times? 2 direct requests. Then 1 conditional warning. Conditional on what? On continued delay. Elias let the translator field catch up in every language. Thank you. Now tell the chamber this. Before Earth escort vessels moved, did any armed platform from Keeler Command shift targeting envelope near the civilian stream? The prosecutor objected immediately. The marshal is not a tactical analyst. Island answered anyway. Yes. Varen lifted the rod. The witness will be heard. Saul's crest plates flared with anger. This exceeds her. Remit. Elias did not move. It exceeds comfort. Varen ignored both of them and looked to Island. State the basis of your answer. I saw the log geometry update on my lane board. I was not analyzing military intent. I was observing corridor hazard. Elias asked the next question carefully. Did that update increase pressure on the trap stream? Yes. And did I know that when I issued the warning attributed to me? Yes. The hall stayed silent because the answer had done its work without noise. It had placed motive directly under the threat line. Saul tried to recover her on redirect. He asked whether Elias still lacked council sanction to move. Island said yes. He asked whether unauthorized movement under stress could worsen a military standoff. She said yes. He asked whether she had ever advised restraint to all parties. She said yes. He sat down as if he had rescued balance. He had not. Everyone had heard the sequence. Civilian danger. Repeated warning. Delayed response. Then movement. Varen ordered the second source interval opened. This one was uglier. It came from layered lane traffic logs, command bursts, and bridge recordings from multiple vessels. The audio snapped and blurred under battle interference. The image map pulsed with overlapping icons. A clean public broadcast would never have shown anything like it. That Elias thought was partly why it had been avoided. Reality in crisis was hard to package and much harder to manipulate once people saw how many decisions collided inside it. The raw segment showed the corridor board at the moment Earth escort vessels moved. It also showed something the public had never seen. A Keeler border frigate had shifted its interdiction arc half a degree inward toward the lane stream, while review was still pending. Half a degree in space meant life and death, depending on where civilians were clustered. Saul stood almost before the clip finished. That shift was defensive caution, not aggressive positioning. Elias spoke from his station. Against whom? Medical barges. Varen struck once for order. The prosecution called another witness before Elias could ask for more source review. This time, it was tactical analyst Baron Vale from the Council's own incident board. That choice was dangerous. A neutral technical phase could still salvage public interpretation if he framed the movement as unavoidable chaos rather than planned burden transfer. Vale was human-shaped, but not human. He belonged to the Leth Consortium, a species with smooth brown-black skin, 2 recessed breathing slits near the collarbone, and no visible eyebrows, which gave his face a permanent look of unsettling calm. He explained the corridor geometry in patient detail. The zone had been unstable. Multiple fleets were operating under compressed channels. Any unsanctioned escort motion, he said, risked triggering mirrored responses. All of that was true. Elias waited until the analyst finished the geometry lecture, then stood. Analyst Vale, you have mapped risk, he said. Now map decision. Vale looked at him steadily. Clarify. Which command decision created the first avoidable rise in civilian exposure? Vale did not answer at once. Risk had been accumulating before any single decision. That is not what I asked. Saul objected. The witness is not here to assign moral blame. I asked for operational sequence, Elias said. Vare nodded once. The witness will answer if the record supports it. Vale turned toward the display, as if the map might shield him. The first avoidable spike followed continued closure of the south relief lane after civilian martial warning. Which authority controlled that closure? Keeler Border Command, subject to negotiation chamber review. So not Earth. No. Second avoidable spike. Vale's breathing slits widened. Interdiction arc compression near the lane stream. Ordered by Keeler Command Grid. And the third. Vale finally looked back at Elias. Earth escort movement across the control line. Elias inclined his head. Good. Now the chamber can hear the sequence in order rather than as a slogan. Saul tried to tear down the structure on redirect, but the analyst was too disciplined to overstate. He would not call Earth blameless. He would not call Keeler innocent. The best he could do for the prosecution was say that multiple parties contributed to escalation under pressure. Mara passed him a note written in her fast block script. Archive, secondary rights log found. Executive access manual override. He did not react on the surface. Secondary rights logs were not public broadcast artifacts. They were the record of who had touched the underlying source after capture. If someone with executive clearance had manually overridden archive routing, the hearing had just grown another spine. When Vorn asked whether either side sought additional evidentiary review, Elias stood before Saul, could block the window. Yes, he said. The defense requests source rights log for the Beliza record. Saul was on his feet instantly. Denied by sensitivity. Rights logs reveal protected security architecture. They reveal custody, Elias said, which is why you do not want them. The chamber's mood turned visibly. Now it was no longer only about what happened at Beliza Gate. It was about whether someone inside the council system had massaged the path by which the event reached the public. And once that question entered the room, the political motive behind the case was no longer far away. Vorn looked displeased. Good. Displeased arbiters often meant real pressure. State your basis. Elias did. Cleanly. Concisely. The public compilation had omitted warnings, pauses, and request refusals. Archive handling had passed through executive concurrence. New review suggested manual override. Therefore, custody itself was at issue. Saul answered with force. Opening executive rights logs would politicize a military incident, expose internal routing, and destabilize confidence in council emergency communication. His argument was smart because it appealed to institutional fear. Many in the chamber would rather live with a bent case than a shaken system. Elias did not argue fear against fear. He argued law against convenience. If confidence in council communication depends on never asking who touched the record, then confidence is already fiction. The line spread through the tears and whispers before the translators even finished. Vorn recessed for consultation again. This time the pause ran longer. 12 minutes by the hall clock. In that space, Elias did what he always did in hard rooms. He counted costs. If rights logs opened and showed nothing, the prosecution would say he had smeared the institution to distract from his own conduct. If they opened and showed exactly what he suspected, the hearing would stop being a prosecution and become a live system crisis. Either result would burn political capital. The only question was whether the truth was worth the burn. He had known the answer since the night Beliza Gate nearly came apart. The arbiters returned. Vorn's face was colder now. The tribunal orders sealed review of rights logs by the bench and designated technical counsel from both sides. Saul relaxed by a fraction. Mara did not. Elias stood. No. Half the chamber turned at once. Vorn's gaze dropped on him like a blade. You will explain that response. This hearing began in public, Elias said. It used public accusation, public simplification, and public injury. If the record path is now in question, the remedy cannot disappear into a side room unless the bench intends the public to accept trust as a substitute for proof. Saul almost smiled. He thought Elias had overreached. Vorn asked, and if protected architecture is exposed? Mask architecture, Elias said. Preserve names, times, and manual interventions. The arbiter's face revealed nothing. But Counselor Marr, from the neutral tier, rose without being called. Protocol bent around senior block members when they chose to spend that privilege. The chamber will note, Marr said, his layered voice rolling through the translators, that institutional credibility is not preserved by private reassurance after public distortion. If there was no manual influence of substance, public masking can show that. If there was private review, cannot cure it. A second neutral representative signaled support. Then a third. Saul's face did not change, but Elias saw the precise moment calculation replace confidence. The votes inside the room were moving. Vorn finally spoke. The tribunal will permit masked rights log display limited to identity tags, intervention markers, and timing. The hall dimmed again. The display did not show code strings, only route history. Initial capture. Archive intake. Technical normalization. Translator sync. Media liaison concurrence. Then a line in red. Executive access. Manual review insert a UTH tag authorized under public stability clause timestamp 4 hours, 13 minutes, and 22 seconds. Standard subsequent action segment priority recomposition. No one in the chamber needed help understanding those last words. Segment priority recomposition was a polite phrase for changing the order of what would be emphasized. Saul stood before anyone else could breathe around it. Emergency communication staff may reorder non-essential segments for clarity. Elias looked up at the display. 43 seconds between refusal and warning are now classified as non-essential. No one laughed. The chamber had moved beyond that. Vorn's voice came down hard. Identify the executive tag. A technical officer at the bench swallowed. Mask. Unmasked to the bench. The officer did so silently. Vorn's expression shifted by a degree. One associate arbiter looked openly stunned. They both turned toward a side tier above public communications where Council Liaison Director Elias Vorn had been seated since morning as a background observer. He was no longer seated. Empty chair. That did more damage than any confession could have done. The chamber broke then, not into chaos, but into layered sound. Translators working harder. Delegates speaking over one another. Media. Drones adjusting altitude. Keeler representatives calling for adjournment. Neutral bloc members demanding continuation. Earth's small delegation sitting very still because movement would only make them look triumphant, and triumph this early would be foolish. Vorn hammered for order until the hall obeyed. The hearing will continue, he said, and now even he sounded as if the ground beneath the institution had changed. The matter before the chamber is no longer limited to envoy Vorn's conduct. It now includes potential manipulation of public evidentiary sequence. There was at last, spoken aloud. Elias remained where he was. He did not allow himself satisfaction. He had forced open one hidden layer, yes. But layers inside systems like this usually nested around a purpose. Manual intervention of that kind did not happen because one communications official disliked nuance. Someone had needed Earth's role to look cleaner, harsher, and earlier than it had been, which meant the next question was not who touched the record. It was who benefited from the touch. He lifted his eyes toward the prosecution tier. Saul had gone quiet. Too quiet. Men who lost control often fought harder. Men who lost control and then went quiet usually already knew what had to be protected next. Elias knew then that the hearing was about to stop being a matter of false presentation and start becoming something more dangerous. It was about to become motive. And once motive appeared, power would not be far behind. In the Galactic Council, those two things rarely traveled separately. By the time the chamber reconvened, after a short systems pause, the hearing had shed its original shape. The public still saw Elias Vorn on trial, but everyone inside the hall now understood the case ran on two tracks. One was whether an Earth envoy had escalated a live corridor without sanction. The other was whether someone inside the council had needed that version badly enough to engineer it. Vorn ordered all non-essential observers removed from side tiers. The command sounded severe, but it did not change the one fact that mattered. The public stream remained active. Saul stood first. He had regained some of his composure, which meant he had selected a new line of defense. He could no longer keep the argument at the level of technical handling alone, so he tried to make motive sound absurd before Elias could name it. The prosecution rejects any attempt to inflate communications triage into evidence of strategic fabrication, he said. At most, the chamber has identified overreach by a media office responding under pressure. Overreach with executive insertion, Elias said. Saul ignored him. Even if errors occurred in public presentation, the underlying operational facts remain. Earth moved ships without sanction. Earth crossed a control line. Earth contributed to escalation. He was trying to drag the hearing back from institutional motive to shared battlefield blame. Elias let him finish. Then he asked, Advocate Saul, who drafted the revised Sector Stability Accord now pending before the Council Security Committee? Saul blinked once. It was the first unguarded reaction Elias had seen from him all day. Irrelevant. No, Elias said. That depends on whether the chamber wants to know why Earth needed to be turned into a public example. Vorn looked down sharply. You will connect the question. I can, Elias said. If the prosecution does not deny that the pending accord would expand emergency authority for border command blocks in any sector where a member power is found to have broken humanitarian corridor restraint. The neutral tiers stirred. They knew the proposal. Many had treated it as dull committee work. Committee work was where power hid best. Saul answered too carefully. The council routinely reviews security frameworks after major incidents. Was this review routine before Belizer Gate? Elias asked. Saul said nothing. Mara arose from the Earth tier with permission from Vorn and transmitted a packet to the bench and public display. It showed committee circulation timestamps. The revised accord had begun internal routing 72 hours before the Belizer incident. That changed the room again. Elias spoke into that silence. So the framework to punish a corridor breach more aggressively was already moving before the incident later used to justify it. Za recovered fast. Contingency drafting is normal. Contingency drafting tied to which sponsors? Vorn ordered the names displayed. They appeared one by one. Healer Border Security Caucus. Executive Coordination Policy Cell. Public Stability Liaison Office. 2 private defense logistics groups under advisory status. The pattern was enough even before money entered the room. Elias turned not to Saul, but to the chamber. If Earth had been condemned cleanly today, who would gain? No one answered. They did not have to. The expanded accord would give the border commands broader authority to seize lane control, compress civilian traffic, under emergency doctrine, and sideline smaller member worlds during crisis review. It would weaken Earth. It would also weaken any species outside the strongest military blocks. Saul came at him hard. This is grandstanding. You are taking a tactical disaster and wrapping it in political suspicion because you cannot defend your own conduct. Elias faced him fully now. I defended my conduct with sequence. I am now examining your motive with timing. Vorn allowed it to stand. The prosecution then played its strongest remaining card. Saul requested admission of withheld Earth communication logs. He framed it as evidence of selective disclosure by the defense, and for the first time that day, he struck something real. Mara stiffened. Elias did not. The display lit with internal Earth message references from Belizer Day. Not the full content, just the fact of omission. Certain encrypted bridge advisories and one private diplomatic channel had not been provided in Earth's initial submission after the incident. The chamber reacted exactly as Saul wanted. You accuse others of curation, Saul said, while Earth itself concealed material. He stepped closer to Elias, voice sharpening. Did Earth omit communication log from the Belizer file? Yes, Elias said. It was the most dangerous answer he could have given, and also the only one that could save him. A wave of sound rolled through the hall. Saul pounced. Then your outrage is theater. You withheld evidence while condemning others for handling evidence. Elias waited for the translators to complete the line in every registered language. Then he said, Earth withheld live civilian routing keys and emergency shelter identifiers. That slowed the room. He continued. Those logs included the masked paths used by families, hospital barges, and refugee clusters after the corridor collapsed. If released in raw form during the post-incident panic, they would have exposed survivors still fleeing reprisal and seizure. Saul shot back, convenient. No, Elias said. Necessary. Vorn spoke before the exchange could harden into noise. Can the defense substantiate that claim? Mara transmitted the redaction protocol Earth had used. The bench reviewed it. Independent humanitarian seal verifiers appeared on the side panel. They were real. They showed that Earth had withheld only location-linked survival routes, not the underlying decision sequence. Elias drove the distinction home because it had to be heard cleanly. Earth hid the whereabouts of vulnerable people. The Council's media office hid the order in which command decisions created the danger around those people. Those are not the same act. Even some of the blocks predisposed against him could not deny the difference once stated that way. Saul tried one more turn. If Earth acted so honorably, why not disclose the redacted frame at once? Because, Elias said, your side was not the only side hunting for leverage after the collapse. I was not going to trade civilian safety for rhetorical purity. That line helped him because it made him imperfect in the right way. He was not pretending Earth had been transparent in all things. He was drawing a harder moral line around what had been protected and why. Vorn ordered the disputed Earth logs reviewed in massed form. The result hit the chamber like a silent detonation. The Hidden Earth channel was not a war channel. It was a shelter corridor relay. The advisories did not direct attack posture. They directed extraction, rerouting, and medical docking away from any lane likely to collapse under retaliatory scans. More importantly, one line in the channel referenced a growing fear inside Earth Command that someone at Belizer wanted an image of human overreach badly enough to let the lane burn first. Saul objected that this was speculative commentary from an Earth aide. Elias answered, then let us see whether speculation matches anyone's instructions. He asked for the final protected source interval from Belizer Day, the one he had not yet forced into the room. The lane command synchronization chain. Saul fought this harder than he had fought anything else. He warned of interblock exposure. He warned of confidential military posture. He warned of precedent. He even warned, indirectly, that pushing further could fracture confidence in the council itself. That warning nearly did the work for Elias. Because systems only ask for trust in place of proof when proof threatens the system more than the lie does. Counselor Marr stood again. The chamber has already seen that sequence, once distorted, altered public judgment. If a command synchronization chain exists that can clarify intent without disclosing code architecture, the chamber should see it. This time no one from the neutral bloc disagreed. Vorn ordered mass release. The synchronization chain appeared as a series of time directives, stripped of encryption but intact in sequence. Corridor status. Lane closure. Civilian warning. Border review hold. Tactical arc compression. Earth request denied. Civilian. Warning repeated. Then came the line that changed the hearing from scandal to indictment. Keeler internal priority note. Force Earth movement, if necessary, to establish violation basis. The translators took a full extra second because no one had built a softer version of that sentence. Saul went visibly white around the mouth. The Keeler delegation erupted in objection, claiming context collapse, claiming internal shorthand, claiming tactical meaning unrelated to provocation. But the room no longer wanted their interpretation first. It wanted the line as written. Vorn demanded source validation. The technical bench confirmed the chain marker was authentic and time-locked inside the original synchronization record. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The chamber asked why Earth was turned into the face of this collapse. There's your answer. Someone needed Earth to move first in view, even if Earth moved to save trapped civilians, because once humans crossed the line, the rest could be edited into doctrine. Marr's amber eyes narrowed toward the Keeler tier. Several delegations that had seemed indifferent when the hearing began were now staring openly at the sponsors of the pending accord. Not because they cared deeply about Elias Vorn as a man. Most did not. They cared because they had just seen how easily a future crisis could be bent against any weaker member state if a strong bloc controlled both pressure and presentation. Saul still tried to fight. Good prosecutors always fought after the wound. The note proves nothing beyond one internal officer's phrasing under stress. Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then why was the public record arranged to make that phrasing come true? No answer. No answer because the chain was complete now. Proposal moving in committee before incident. Manual intervention in public evidence. Border Command note seeking an Earth movement that could establish violation basis. Pending law that would reward a confirmed Earth violation with expanded power for the same security block. That was not random panic. That was architecture. Vorn recessed the chamber for emergency bench review. During the recess, no one came near Elias except Mara. Even Earth's own delegates held back, understanding that in moments like this the wrong expression could become tomorrow's clip. Mara handed him water. His hand was steady when he took it. You have them, Mara whispered. No, he said. Not yet. They can't bury that line. They can still dilute it, reframe it, call it one officer, call it context, call it crisis shorthand. Mara exhaled. Then what's left? Elias looked toward the empty observer chair, where Havel Sorn had been sitting earlier. Intent, he said, not only on paper, in voice. He had one final piece. He had kept it because he had not wanted to use it unless the chamber forced him into open war with the council's upper machinery. A personal memory clip from a negotiation antechamber before formal session, recorded under emergency continuity rules when the signal field had glitched. It was not foolproof by itself, but placed against everything else, it would complete motive. Vorn returned. The chamber settled. The bench finds sufficient basis to continue on questions of procedural distortion and strategic inducement, he said. The chamber will hear any final clarifying submission from the defense before ruling on immediate charges. That was the window Elias had been waiting for. He stood and said, I have one. The hall changed when Elias asked for personal continuity evidence. Emergency continuity clips were ugly, partial, and rarely introduced unless someone was prepared to burn all remaining caution. Saul reacted at once. Improper. Personal continuity capture may include privileged pre-session contact. It may, Elias said, which is why I did not raise it until the chamber saw enough to understand why it matters. Vorn's eyes narrowed. State the scope. Antechamber interaction, Belizer Gate, 9 minutes before formal corridor session. Audio primary. Visual intermittent. No tactical strings. Why was it retained? Signal instability triggered continuity fallback in my delegation slate. We logged it, sealed it, and withheld it with the civilian protection batch because it referenced shelter reroutes after the chamber exchange. Saul moved quickly. So again the defense admits withholding. Elias answered. Again the defense distinguishes between hiding survivors and hiding causality. Vorn consulted briefly with the bench and then allowed mass playback. The chamber dimmed for the last time that day. What appeared on the display was poor by design. The visual flickered in and out, showing only fragments of a narrow service antechamber outside the negotiation room. Bulkhead lights. A wall console. The edge of Elias' shoulder. Another figure half out of frame. But the audio was clear enough. The second voice belonged to Delegate RHYSS Tau of the Keeler Block. Tau was saying, if your escorts move first, this becomes manageable. Elias' recorded voice answered, tired and hard. Manageable for whom? Tal. For everyone who needs legal clarity afterward. A scrape of movement. A field hiss. Tal again, lower now. Do not force me to say this twice. If Earth crosses the line in view, the rest can be stabilized. Elias on the clip. You're talking about civilians in that lane. Tal. I'm talking about preventing regional fracture. Elias. By creating a public breach, you can blame on me. Tal. By creating an event the council can use. The audio ended there. The continuity slate had cut when the fallback buffer rolled into another channel. No one in the chamber moved. This was impact. The clip did not merely suggest provocation. It gave the chamber a living official saying the quiet part aloud before the formal session began. Saul stood on reflex more than intent. The clip is partial. Yes, Elias said. It lacks full context. Yes. It could refer to lawful sequence management after any breach. Elias looked at him. Then pair it with the internal note. Pair it with the public edit. Pair it with the pending accord. Pair it with the denied lane requests. How much more context do you need before a pattern becomes a plan? This time the line drew not a murmur, but several open statements from the chamber, translated over one another. The neutral bloc demanded that Tal be brought forward. The Keeler representatives tried to halt the call. The public drones shifted so quickly that one clipped the light field above the north tier and had to correct. Vorn restored order with difficulty. Then he ordered RHYSS Tau, summoned under compulsory appearance. Tau entered the hearing chamber 40 minutes later, and in that time, no one truly relaxed. The public stream carried analysis across half the known routes. Markets and committees would already be moving. Elias stood through all of it and conserved his breath. When Tau finally took the stand, He looked composed in the manner of men who have understood they can no longer win and are now choosing what shape their loss will take. He was keeler like Saul and Malek, but older, with darker hide plates and a scar along the left jaw where one old fracture had healed unevenly. Saul declined direct examination. That was revealing. He did not want fresh lies anchored to his own questions. Vorn therefore examined first. Did you, or did you not, speak the words heard in the continuity clip? Tal's first answer was procedural. I request closed review due to diplomatic sensitivity. Denied, Vorn said. Tal inhaled once. I spoke words substantially similar. The hall tightened around the admission. Vorn continued. Did you mean that an Earth movement could be used to justify later legal action? Tal looked not at Vorn, but at Elias. I meant that once control failed, the Council would need a visible initiating act to prevent block fracture. Elias said, so you needed a first sinner. Tal's jaw hardened. I needed a survivable narrative. That answer was more honest than wise. The arbiter asked the next question in a colder voice. Did your block discuss using an Earth response to support expanded border authority? Tal did not speak. Vorn repeated the question. Yes, Tal said at last. The chamber broke into layered speech again. Keeler representatives protested. Neutral delegates demanded names. The Earth tier remained silent, and that silence now had weight. Tal kept speaking once the sound lowered enough to be heard. Perhaps he had decided the only path left was to turn explanation into partial defense. The armistice was already failing, he said. Belizer Gate was one spark away from open regional war. If the Council did not impose stronger emergency control afterward, larger systems would begin unilateral corridor enforcement. We drafted the accord to prevent wider collapse. Elias answered from the floor, not as prosecutor, but as the man Tal had tried to use. And when no clean triggering breach appeared, you chose to make Earth carry one. Tal did not deny it directly. You were the only actor at the table with both enough pride to resist and enough restraint to stop short of full retaliation. You had moved to save the lane. We knew that. There was at last. The political logic sat in the open now. They had counted on a human rescue decision, then planned to use it as proof of human aggression. It was not only contempt. It was calculation wrapped in respect and twisted into weapon form. Mara shut her eyes briefly. Counselor Mara looked almost ill with anger. Tal continued, perhaps because silence had become impossible. We did not intend the lane to deteriorate as far as it did. The review hold was supposed to pressure, not collapse. But once the geometry turned, we needed the legal frame more urgently, not less. Saul actually rose then, not to defend the plan, but to contain the damage. The chamber should note that any such internal discussion, however reckless, does not erase envoy Vorn's unsanctioned action. Elias turned toward him. No, it defines it. He faced the chamber and spoke carefully because these were the words that would remain after the noise burned off. I moved ships without council sanction. That is true. I moved them after repeated requests to open a trapped civilian lane were denied. I moved them toward vulnerable traffic, not toward military positions. I moved them in the exact crisis your bloc expected me to choose because you believed a human rescue decision would give you the public breach you needed. If the chamber wants to judge that act, judge it whole. No one interrupted him. He went on. Judge the delay before it. Judge the targeted pressure around it. Judge the edited record after it. Judge the law waiting in committee before it. Judge the survivors Earth refused to expose. Judge the officers who thought people in a lane could be converted into leverage if the timing was arranged correctly. His voice never rose, and that made the room listen harder. I'm not asking this chamber to declare Earth innocent of all hard choices. I am asking it to stop pretending those choices happened inside a neutral frame. Vorn let the silence stand for a long time. Then he recessed the bench for final ruling. The wait stretched close to an hour. Nothing moved quickly now. The chamber had all the pieces, and every delegation knew the ruling would reach far beyond Elias himself. During that hour, Elias finally felt the first tremor in his hands. It was small. He hid it by resting them on the rail before him. Mara stood beside him without speaking. Across the hall, the Keeler tier had collapsed into knots of urgent consultation. Saul's face had become the flat mask of a man already calculating what testimony he would deny remembering tomorrow. Tal sat alone under security watch, not resigned, not broken, but staring at the floor with the stare of someone who still believed the plan had been necessary and could not understand why necessity had failed to protect him from consequence. When the arbiters returned, every delegation rose. Vorn read the ruling in a voice stripped of ceremony. On the immediate charge that envoy Elias Vorn initiated unlawful hostile escalation for coercive political effect, the chamber finds the allegation unsupported. A shock passed through the room, even though everyone expected it. On the question of unauthorized movement across an active control line, the chamber finds that movement occurred, but further finds that the act took place under an induced emergency framework shaped by withheld civilian risk, denied relief requests, and deliberate effort by other parties to manufacture violation basis. He looked toward the Keeler block and then toward the side tier, where the empty observer chair remained. The tribunal therefore suspends all punitive action against envoy Vorn and orders immediate investigation of command actors, communications offices, and sponsoring policy bodies involved in evidence manipulation, inducement strategy, and procedural distortion. The sounding rod came down once. Then again, the pending sector stability accord is frozen pending inquiry. That line might have mattered more to the future than Elias' own exoneration. The chamber erupted in full voice at last. Drones pulled wider shots. Delegates transmitted emergency notes. Security moved toward Tal and 3 Keeler aides. Archive officers were already being summoned to secure source vaults before anyone higher up could scrub them. Mara let out one breath, long and shaking. You did it. Elias kept his eyes on the arbiter bench. No, he said. They did it to themselves. We just forced the chamber to hear it in the right order. Vorn rose before leaving the chamber, and for a brief moment his gaze met Elias across the distance. There was no apology there. Institutions like this did not apologize in any form worth trusting. But there was recognition. Recognition that the man who had entered the hall as a manageable defendant had left a wound in the machinery that would not close cleanly. Security approached the Earth tier, not to arrest but to escort. Standard protection now that the hearing had broken into system crisis. As Elias turned to leave, Counselor Mars stepped down from his block ring and intercepted him near the exit lane. Up close, the mineral lines in Mars' charcoal skin glinted like old fractures filled with light. You could have taken the easier survival, Mars said. Share blame, narrow censure, quiet retirement. Yes, you chose to ignite the structure instead. I chose not to let them build doctrine on a lie. Mar inclined his heavy head. That is usually how structures ignite. He moved aside. The walk out of the hall felt longer than the entry had because the eyes watching him had changed. Some were hostile. Some were calculating. Some were against all political instinct, respectful. At the outer passage, Mara spoke again. The public is already calling it the Vorn reversal. Elias almost smiled, but the expression never fully arrived. Bad name, effective one. He looked through the tall passage windows toward the traffic rivers of Verex Prime. Ships moved beyond the glass in silent streams. Freight, diplomatique kraft, relief carriers. The kind of movement people never notice until someone powerful decides movement itself can be turned into law. This won't end it, Mara said. No, they'll say it was one block, a communications failure, a crisis distortion. Yes, and some of them will still hate Earth more for surviving this. Yes, she studied him. You sound tired. I am tired. Do you regret moving the escorts? He answered without taking time to think, because he had already thought about it in every quiet hour since Belizer Gate. No, even knowing they were waiting for it. Elias finally looked at her. If a trap only works when decent people still choose to save others, the answer is not to stop being decent. Mara held his gaze for a second, then nodded. They continued down the passage while security held the route ahead. Behind them, the hearing hall still roared with controlled panic. Investigations would spread. Deals would be cut. Some truth would be buried again, because that was how systems survived exposure. But not all of it. Not this time. At the final security door, Elias paused and looked back once through the narrowing gap. The hall beyond was only a slice now. Light. Movement. A storm inside architecture. When he had entered that place, he had been the human they meant to break on live record. The small power. The manageable defendant. The necessary example. He left it as something far more dangerous to them. A man who had stood in the center of the Galactic Council and forced a system built on hierarchy, performance, and controlled sequence to hear the truth in the order it had actually happened. For one day, that was enough. Across the watching worlds, every government that had ever believed Earth could be cornered, simplified, and written into compliance had just learned the same hard lesson. Humanity was not easy to crush. In the end, Elias Vorn did not win because the system was fair. He won because the truth survived long enough to be heard. That was what made the silence in that chamber so powerful. Not just the fall of one lie, but the moment an entire council realized humanity would not be crushed into a useful story. Earth had not walked into that hall asking for mercy. It had walked in carrying memory, pressure, and the will to stand when standing alone would have been easier to abandon. Maybe that was why they feared humanity. Not because humans were the biggest force in the galaxy, but because they did not break as easily as others had hoped. For a long moment, Elias stood there and let the quiet settle after the storm. Then he turned away from the narrowing view of the chamber and kept walking. Some battles ended with triumph. This one ended with record, consequence, and a truth that could no longer be arranged into something cleaner. That was enough. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps this channel grow and brings more human versus galaxy stories to life. And before you go, tell me this. Would you have made the same choice Elias made?